All right, so what you fancy doing? Pyrrhus, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. I haven't read any his Life of Pyrrhus and something else I read about him. I haven't read anything about him for years, but I think I can remember most of it.
Okay,
So it's a
cool.
very exciting story.
Yeah, it's complicated as well. I mean, I
Yeah.
thought maybe we could sort of pick up more or less where Alexander dies, because in a few of our comments, people have said they want to do hear us talk about the wars of the how do you pronounce it?
Diadochi.
Diadochi.
I
Got to get
think
that
so.
right. The wars of the Diadochi. Anyway,
If I'm wrong, someone put in the comments and let me know. Because I might be wrong.
because I always thought it was a Diadochi. I've been saying for years, but
I'm not saying it's not.
Diadochi. We'll say that. We'll use that.
It sounds good, doesn't it? If nothing else.
Yeah. I think one of the things to say is that it is really complicated, though. It's not like a cop-out to say that. It really is. It's like among the most complicated periods I've ever, looked at or read about.
Oh yeah, it's the reason is because Alexander had essentially monopolized all of this kind of momentum in the figure of the king of Macedon, and then he dies, and suddenly Alexander's companions are like, okay, so who owns what?
Yeah, and there's like multiple stories, multiple sort of narratives going on at once, and to get it all straight in your mind and for it all to make sense, it's actually really complicated. When you look at like certain people or certain stories in history, they're quite straightforward. Like, say, just off the top of my head, the story of Richard II. There's half a dozen characters, if you like, in that.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty straightforward linear story from start to finish, a beginning, middle, and an end.
Yeah.
But whereas talking about the wars of the successors, it's so much more complicated than that. When you've ever looked in detail, perhaps, about the English Civil War, and it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper, and you think you've got a handle on it, but it's not quite,
Yeah, it's like pre-revolutionary European politics, because it's all of these royal families that have married into one another and created this vast network of interests and alliances. And so I mean, for example, Pyrrhus was Alexander's cousin. Is that correct? It's been a while. Yeah. So yeah, he's the cousin of Alexander the Great, and he ends up when he was like 12 years old or something. Before then, being in the court of Ptolemy II, or wasn't it, or Ptolemy I, in Alexandria in Egypt. And so this guy, the Alexander's oversized impact on the world and the incredibly important players who are surrounding him, who then end up taking over essentially management of parts of his empire, create this massive network of royal interests.
Really incestuous.
Totally. It becomes incredibly complicated, as you say.
Yeah, sorry. Particularly though between the Macedonian throne or royal line and the Epirot one, people from Epirus. Pyrrhus is from Epirus. They're particularly close and incestuous. But yeah, like when I did a series on Nixon, and in that, again, there's so many characters, so many people, so many different people there that I had to be, deliberately leave people out, because it'd be too complicated to mention them. And I think we'll have to do that with the successor wars we're going to talk about just for a few minutes before we get to Pyrrhus himself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think it's important for people to remember that the Macedonians and Epirots, they're kind of like the more barbarous edges of Greece, and these two Greek states are right next door to each other, so they've got a lot of like kinship ties and cultural understanding, similarities, like you say, there's a lot of breeding between the houses and between the families. So this. It is very, very incestuous, and it does get really complicated. So I'll let you just lay it out if you want, because you've obviously got this prepared.
Well, I suppose just on the back of that, just to say, I suppose one of the anchors to bear in mind is that Alexander's mum, Olympias, is from Epirus. Yeah. So right away there, that's sort of something to bear in mind. I think one of the things with these wars, when Pyrrhus is born about 4 or 5 years after Alexander dies, but and he these wars of the successors go on for so long, 20 odd years or whatever, that he ends up becoming a player himself as a young adult towards the very end of it. But his whole formative years, his childhood and everything would have been the backdrop of it, those wars. And even in just a few years between Alexander dying and him being born, it's filled with action. So I suppose to pick up the story, then Alexander dies, and sort of everything falls apart. His generals are just reliant on his orders every day, more or less. And with no one to issue the orders, it's sort of every man for himself. And and the way it works is, I know you know, in the ancient world, often men or battalions or divisions or regiments or whatever you want to say are loyal to the individual commander, and that was no different in Alexander's army. So it just broke off into factions immediately, and there were revolts both in the east and the west. Like loads of revolts just happened in Greece and right out in Bactria, like 20,000 plus guys just deserted from Bactria. They're like, bugger this for a game of soldiers, I'm not staying out here forever. Well, I'm supposed to stay out here forever. And so everything just sort of went up in flames sort of immediately upon the death of Alexander.
Yeah. This begins the period of roughly about 200 years, isn't it? Until the Romans finally whack them all. But it's generations of empire, like Eastern empires, and playing power politics through these monarchies that get set up from Alexander's companions who take over various places. Was it Antigonus takes Macedon, wasn't it? Well, Antigonus doesn't come into it for quite a while, so that's one of the things. Like, to get it clear in your mind exactly what happened, it is complicated. Like, so for example, one thing I thought to say was that quite often in wars, the people that end up winning it when it's a long drawn out thing, they're sort of not really on the scene at the beginning. Like an example of that is Eisenhower in the 30s. He was sort of begging for a command anywhere, and he ends up being, the supreme commander in World War II. And there's multiple examples of that sort of thing. And the guys that end up sort of at the top, perhaps with the exception of Ptolemy, at the end of it, they're just like under commanders, because sort of many layers of these guys get killed or murdered. So anyway, when Alexander dies, the main big players, Ptolemy, just takes Egypt. It's like he sort of just goes, I bagsy Egypt. Yeah. I take Egypt. Thanks. Yeah. And he stays down there. And that's another sort of, because it's so complicated, again, one anchor you can sort of have in your mind is that Ptolemy is never ousted from Egypt. And as we said in the Alexander video, he's one of the 2 or 3 that actually last for a while. Yeah. In fact, he starts a dynasty in Egypt, right down to Cleopatra is the descendant of Ptolemy. When they finally get taken over by the Roman Republic.
Yeah, I mean, her brother that she has a civil war with is called Ptolemy. He's like Ptolemy I don't know what, I'm embarrassing myself, but Ptolemy the 7th or Ptolemy the 15th or whatever he was. So yeah, that was the direct line. They were Macedonians. They weren't really Egyptian. And another thing to say, which is a parallel with the Nixon stories, there's loads of people with the same names. There's quite a few Ptolemies.
At least we're not covering Carthage, because there's
even worse.
Yeah, even worse. But there are. But the name itself becomes a point of status. This is why everyone started calling themselves Caesar in the advent of Caesar. So, but yeah, sorry, Karen.
Yeah, the name Ptolemy ends up becoming a title in a way, doesn't it? Basically, yeah. And so the Ptolemy, the main Ptolemy, is later in the story names himself Ptolemy Soter, Ptolemy the Saviour. So if it's ever unclear, I might say that to make it clear who's the Ptolemy. Like, he has 2 sons and he calls them both Ptolemy. Alexander's got like a half brother or something that's called Ptolemy, and there's another couple of Pyrrhus' son is called Ptolemy. He calls him Ptolemy. It's like, Antigonus's grandson is an Antigonus. Antipater has a grandson called Antipater. It's like, you're not making it easy.
Apparently the name means aggressive and warlike.
Ptolemy.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, makes sense.
It comes from Ptolemeos or something. I just looked it up. That's what Wikipedia tells us. But obviously popular name because it sounded manly, I guess.
Yeah. And so you have that in your mind, that Ptolemy goes down and sort of bags his Egypt. Just sort of shotguns Egypt straight away, and no one's never ousts him from there. But the other big players, there's Antipater, who was always left in as regent back in Greece, back in the Grecian theatre. So he's sort of, because he's old and sort of revered in a way, and known, he's sort of one of, just immediately, sort of obviously by default, one of the main players. And other than that, Perdiccas, which was one of Alexander's main generals, sort of. He ends up becoming regent. So technically, when a king dies, there should be a succession, and that does happen. And there's arguments whether it should be Alexander's brother, he always gets described as mentally deficient or something, or he had some sort of learning difficulties. It's not clear, but he was weak and would have always been somebody's puppet. Yeah. Or Alexander's son. He had an illegitimate son who was tiny, called Hercules.
Yeah, he was an infant, wasn't he?
But Roxana was pregnant, and she gave birth soon after Alexander died, weeks or months soon after, and gave birth to a boy. The king, the legit king, Alexander the Fourth of Macedonia, and this giant empire. But of course, as a baby, it's it's not going to bode well.
There's nothing you can do. Whoever the regent has to be chosen, and that's basically the new ruler. So yeah, it's like the whole thing just falls apart, doesn't it?
Yeah, pretty much straight away. I mean, the baby goes back to Macedonia and he's under sort of the care of Roxana and his mum, Olympias, Alexander's mum, the grandmother. Olympias.
Doesn't he get murdered?
Well, eventually, yeah. I mean, I was supposed to be talking about Pyrrhus. Maybe we could just cut through this a bit quicker.
But the point is, I think that people get the impression of what's going on, right? It is not a settled political order. There's huge amounts of competition, and it creates a very competitive environment, and Pyrrhus, and it's very intimate. So Pyrrhus goes to Egypt as a child, as a hostage. In what that does essentially just politically ensures good behavior, and they're raised like a nobleman, so it's not like it's not, they're not in chains or anything, which is what you normally think when you think hostage.
yeah it's not the same thing. I mean, he was quite old by that point. I mean,
how old's old, I suppose, is the question.
He's about 17 at that point.
Was it that old? I thought at like 12 he got the throne of Pyrrhus.
Yeah. So he gets the throne then, but then he's sort of a puppet of the Illyrians, and then he goes to a wedding when he's about 17 and he's dethroned.
That's right.
And then he goes down meets up with Demetrius and Antigonus's faction. But I suppose if I just quickly run through immediately after Alexander's death in Greece there's the Lamian War. But it's so-called Lamian War against Antipater, however you want to say that. But he puts that down. And then basically Perdiccas is too powerful, and it's everyone versus Perdiccas, basically. Like all the other big players, like Ptolemy, Craterus. Craterus is like thought of, they've all got like sort of different characters. These Diadochi, and Diadochi. Yeah. And Craterus is known. He's known as sort of the hardest, like personally, really brave and hard, and really good at fighting personally. And anyway, it's everyone. And Antigonus, one of the more sort of junior at that point commanders, all against Perdiccas and Eumenes. I mentioned at the end of the Alexander video his secretary Eumenes and Plutarch. Plutarch does a whole life of Eumenes. So we've got quite a lot about him. We know what happened, all his adventures and stuff.
I don't think I've actually read that one.
Yeah,
so I'm not too familiar.
Well, he ends up having all sorts of battles. Well, he ends up dead before really Pyrrhus is. Well, it happens while Pyrrhus is a little boy, really. But his adventures are really long and complicated.
Right. Okay.
But I mean, they have the partition. The famous there's a couple of partitions actually when they sort of get together and have to divide things up. But along the way, Antigonus becomes, and his son Demetrius, they're like sort of really the big figures that become big in the age of when Pyrrhus becomes involved in things.
Demetrius is a pretty important guy, isn't he? Sorry to interrupt. Didn't he end up being responsible for the creation of the bronze statue at Rhodes?
Rhodes, yeah, that's right. Well, apparently, he was pushed back at Rhodes. They put up like this really gallant defense. Gallant defense. Him. And when he left, they put up. Apparently put that up. Yeah,
the Colossus of Rhodes. Because he was known as the besieger, wasn't he? And he built like this gargantuan siege tower that never actually got used. And with all this scrap bronze, they melted it down and apparently built this huge statue, which wasn't that huge. I went to the actual spot where the statue is. I mean, there's nothing there now.
Really?
Yeah, there's nothing there really apart from just a little thing that says, hey, this is where the statue was. But it was about 100 feet tall, which is tall, but not that tall or something. Oh, not even 100 feet, actually. But it was tall, but not that tall, But it was very, very big for the time.
Yeah, well, that siege tower had a nickname, like the Taker of Cities or something. It was meant to be sort of 9 stories high, the biggest siege tower ever constructed or something.
And one thing that's interesting as well is that all through history, giant siege weapons have had names. In the Albigensian Crusade, the Crusaders used a massive trebuchet that they called the Bad Neighbor, which was hilarious. So they've always given these things strange names, just to a bit of levity, I suppose. But sorry, yeah, Karen.
One sort of, I suppose, a few of the 4 or 5 sort of important events in those wars is ends up Craterus has a battle with Eumenes. Eumenes is sort of supposed to be this sort of effete, sort of semi-sickly secretary versus Craterus, the hardest general.
Yeah,
and he beats him like against the odds. You know, you wouldn't put any money on that. You know, like Halifax Town beating Liverpool 6-1 at Anfield.
Yeah.
Wouldn't. It's not going to happen.
Craterus disgraced. What happened to Craterus after that?
Well, no, he was killed in that battle.
Oh, he was killed in the battle, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Christ.
Yeah, it's like Floyd Mayweather slamming Brock Lesnar. It's just you didn't see it coming. Basically.
Oh, there we go.
And
what was the name of that battle? Sorry.
What one is that? Is it the Battle of the Hellespont? I think it's the Battle of the Hellespont. That's still in the first war of the Diadochi. So it keeps getting like the map just keeps getting redrawn when one of the big guys dies, one of Alexander's original generals die. So yeah, Antigonus becomes a big player, and Seleucus, who, as we all know, again, if you know your history even a little bit, you know he starts a massive dynasty empire.
Yeah,
But he was but he was like one of the under lieutenants, a captain, until this sort of point. So it's just
suddenly
interesting.
He's ruling half of Asia.
Rising. Yeah.
But Seleucus was an amazing general, actually. He won. I think did he lose a single battle? I think he won all of his battles.
Well, I suppose, yeah. At the very end, he doesn't.
Well, yeah, he dies in battle at the end. But
he sort of has an indecisive battle, and then is murdered by his own men. So he didn't really lose. He didn't get humiliated, semi-humiliated. But yeah, he didn't totally lose and was outed or anything. But
he was like, I remember years ago, like, you know, looking at the careers of the Diadochi, and Seleucus was the one that really impressed me because, like, Egypt, it's a fairly well-defined geographic area. You've got the Nile, you go up and down this Nile, and that's yours. You know, it's pretty well defined. Like, you know, Antigonus in Macedon, it's an existing kingdom. Greece, you've already got it defined. Who was in Asia Minor? I can't remember who was in Asia Minor, but then you had
it keeps changing hands. That's the thing.
Right. But then you have like Seleucus in Asia, and that's like from Syria to Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan to India, and the top and bottom borders of it are just totally porous. You know, who knows who controls what where. And so, like, of all those starting positions, if we were going to treat them like that, Seleucus easily has the worst. You know, you can see why Ptolemy survived longest in Egypt, because it looks like you can see it being a secure thing. Your entire west flank is just desert, you know, and then so it's just, and you know, to the south there's barbarian tribes and stuff like that. So you've got it made pretty much. Yeah,
and the Sinai bounds you as well.
Yes,
nicely.
Yeah.
Seleucus's story is incredible. Like he actually at one point goes way out to India, or the Indus Valley, what they call India, and he goes way out there and has battles and things. And he comes
secures a peace treaty with 500 war elephants.
Oh yeah, thank you very much.
Sorry for spoiling it.
Yeah, they give him 500 war elephants. Yeah, to go away basically.
Yeah. But isn't that mental? Like, you know, literally fighting with Indian kings and bring back these strange beasts, and these are brand new to Europe at this point. You know, this is where the Romans end up first learning and encountering war elephants, isn't it?
Yeah, they haven't seen them at all when Pyrrhus goes over there. Yeah. But Seleucus, just real quick, just particularly, like, he re-enters Babylon, I'm not exaggerating, I think 5 or 6 times. Mm-hmm. Like the first time with Alexander, of course, he was there. He would have been there the first time, that original glorious golden time. But the lands sort of change hands so many times that he does re-enter it, because quite often there'll be a battle or an engagement near Babylon or just in that region,
Yeah.
then whoever wins that just can then enter Babylon. But he does it like, I think it's 4, 5 or 6 times. It's silly. And so his story particularly is a roller coaster one. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the story goes, there's like the second war, and that Antipater, who's sort of this sort of anchor, this sort of key player, he's really old. All these guys, he was sort of in the age of Philip. Antipater, you know, he dies of old age. He's like 80 years old or something, and that sparks off, another war, and they all go at each other's throats. And in this one, in the maelstrom, Olympias herself is murdered, and Cassandra comes in.
That's Alexander's mother, isn't it, that you're referring to?
Yeah, Olympias. Yeah.
Just for anyone listening.
And so now Cassandra comes into it, and Cassandra controls his Antipater's son, and he just inherits Macedon and Greece, basically. And so when Pyrrhus is a boy and coming of age and into his young adulthood, you know, Cassandra is this big player, the main player on his border that he deals with and has to deal with, and then later Cassandra's children, the original Antipater's grandchildren. That's one of the things about the story of Pyrrhus, is that quite a lot of it is the children and grandchildren of those that are in the Alexander story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really honestly, it would make an amazing TV series, because like Game of Thrones style, because of the continuity of it, you know, because like the characteristics of the children, you get to see them as they're growing up. Like Pyrrhus is characteristically boisterous and warlike. You know, he is in the Alexandrian mold of like what a Greek hero should be like. Whereas a lot of the other ones aren't like that. You know, the slimy backstabbers and all this sort of stuff. You know, it's the full variety of the human experience. It'd make an amazing TV series, but they'll never do it because, well, I don't know, they suck.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I vividly remember first hearing that Pyrrhus existed. I don't know how old I was, about 13 or something. And it was mentioned to me, or I first heard it. Someone said, you know, there's an Alexander of the West. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? What? And I think actually that's quite generous to describe him as an Alexander of the West. There are loads of parallels, and in some ways he's an even more exaggerated version of Alexander in quite a few ways, but just nowhere near as successful.
Well, okay, so I've got a good line of Pyrrhus apologetics that you're going to get now. So one of the things, the situation in the West was completely different to the situation in the East. In the East, you had one giant hegemonic power, but it was a bit of a paper tiger, really. And like, you know, Alexander and the professional Macedonian army went over and smashed it, which left the power of Persia being in like numbers. It didn't matter, because the Macedonian army could deal with that. And so essentially it wasn't as, you know, like I would have loved to have seen what Alexander would have done against the Romans. I mean, these are the early Romans, so it's definitely not like some sort of guarantee that he wouldn't have won or something. And I'm sure he would have won, but like it would have been a lot more difficult than I think he would have. I mean, not that the conquest of Persia was easy or anything, but it's a different situation, because you've also got Carthage just sitting there, and then you've got various like barbarian hordes. Because it's at one point in this say like, I don't know, 100-year period, you get a massive barbarian invasion that the Macedonians have to turn back, and it's a terrifying thing. 'Cause it's like, I don't know, 80,000 Celts who just come down and start plundering and pillaging and raping.
Yeah, Gauls. I think they're Gauls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've traveled from like somewhere in northwest Europe all the way down through the Balkans, and they're like, wow, Macedon's rich, we'll start looting. And it takes them years to kill off all these bloody Celts. And at one point, Pyrrhus hires a bunch of the remnants as mercenaries after the Celtic horde has been smashed, because just because you've destroyed this horde, you haven't killed them all. You still got tens of thousands of, you know, Celtic tribesmen running around, you know, the countryside pillaging stuff. It's a fucking nightmare, man. Like, the ancient world was just difficult. That's the best way to put it. Just difficult to live in.
Yeah. Just extremely violent. Like, it just, life would have been precarious. You never know when literally just people turn up on the horizon. It sounds like, well, it is a cliche. that is what it would have been. Just one day, some men are on the horizon, and well, they've got bad intentions, and everything in life is destroyed. That can happen. I mean, to live a life like we do, knowing a guarantee you're not going to have to deal with that. Well, it does make for a completely different type of person, doesn't it?
Well, you say that, but look what's happening on the border of Greece at the moment.
Well, yeah, but you still,
no. It's not 50,000 armed barbarians under a warlord who's organizing how to get into your city or something, which is what they would do. What they do, and it's terrible because you'd either be killed or enslaved, and it's like, okay, great. What a wonderful set of options you have here. It's genuinely, and this would happen with alarming regularity. The original sack of Rome was just one of these random Celtic war bands or war hosts, where tens of thousands of Celtic barbarians would just be like, oh, look what's to the south, easy plunder, let's go take it, and that's what they did. It's just a fact of life.
Yeah, there's one specific anecdote, actually, where some Gauls raid the royal graveyard in Macedonia for treasure. And Pyrrhus, at that point, happens to be in control of Macedonia and just sort of doesn't punish them or something. And it's weird. It's like, because he's not sure why, but they're just sort of allowed to get away with loads of stuff for no apparent reason.
Yeah. Presumably because he wanted to use them as mercenary troops.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was part of it, I think, yeah.
Because this sort of time period after Greece has been militarized for quite a while, and mercenaries are just commonplace these days.
Yeah. So there's like the third war and the fourth war and a Babylonian war, which we don't know much about because it's not really covered much. Like Plutarch, we've got, obviously he does a life of Pyrrhus, he does a life of Eumenes, like I said, and he does a life of Demetrius. Demetrius is Antigonus's son. And Antigonus is an old one-eyed general, like this old grizzled Alexandrian, or even fought under Philip.
Yeah. His name is Antigonus Monophthalmos or something, which means Antigonus the one-eyed. He's like your typical battle-scarred veteran soldier. He's an awesome character in a film.
Yeah, you can. Yes, I'm sure I'll be able to find a picture or two of him. It's quite cool. And Demetrius is his son. And as you say, this Demetrius becomes an important character in Pyrrhus's life and Pyrrhus's story. So I'll put a map up. I'll find something because it's hard to get your mind around without a map, but it just makes sense if I do that. But so you've got Ptolemy down in Egypt. You've got Seleucus out in the east. You've got sort of Antigonus and Demetrius in sort of the main middle sort of Turkey and the Levant and that sort of area. You've got Lysimachus or Lysimachus, however you want to say it.
Lysimachus.
You say Lysimachus?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, Lysimachus. Yeah. He's up north in sort of Thrace, like in sort of the northern bit of the map. And there's the Illyrians, and then you've got like the Greek theatre with Cassander controlling really Greece, other than Sparta, at least nominally. And then you've got Epirus, which is sort of modern day Albania, isn't it? Really.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I tell you what, man, if there's one thing you don't want to do is get into the fucking ethnic slanging matches that they have over this identity. My God, it is a nightmare because they both want to lay claim effectively to Alexander the Great.
You mean these days? You mean?
Yeah, modern like ethnic conflict over these identities is truly a wonder to behold. But anyway, moving on swiftly because now I'm going to get comments in the comment section about it.
Well, didn't they make Macedonia? Didn't Greece make Macedonia call itself North Macedonia?
Something
is
like
that right?
Yeah.
Do you know about this?
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah.
Because it's quite jealously guarded, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it was even then, actually. It was even then, like whoever controlled the throne of Macedonia, it's a highly prized thing for everybody, really.
Oh yeah.
And for Pyrrhus himself. So I suppose if we're going to just dive into his childhood, because his life starts in the middle of these wars. And when he's like 3 years old, as we mentioned, his father, who's the king, is deposed. And he's sort of spirited away. He's whisked out because he would have been, if he was caught by his enemies, he would have just been murdered, presumably. So he's whisked north to Illyria, And it makes me think,
okay, yeah. So that just Glaucus, man.
Yeah, Glaucus the king.
Yeah, Glaucus. I don't know much about Glaucus. I only heard about him in Life of Pyrrhus. But the way that Plutarch describes him makes Glaucus seem like a really sympathetic guy. Like here is this. He's like a toddler, isn't he? He's just learning to walk. And Pyrrhus, yeah. And Glaucus is sat there, like thinking, what am I going to do with a problem? Because Pyrrhus is a problem. You know, like the way that it is Pyrrhus is a node in a web, and now Glaucus is being drawn into this web. Does he want this? Well, probably not. And as he's thinking about it, the young Pyrrhus comes over and starts pulling himself up on his robe, and that's when Glaucus goes, "Oh, okay, then I'll look after you. I'll take you in." Is that correct? It's been a while, but yeah, it's been a while since I read all this, but it was a really touching story as far as I remember.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. And like, what a commitment to make, because people have said that his wife, Glaucus's wife, was a Molossian. The Epirots, the people from Epirus, were Molossian people.
This is one of the tribes of Epirus, yeah.
One of the tribes, yeah. And so his wife was one of those, and she might have sort of lent on him to say, spare him. And also, the politics of it. It's valuable to him, perhaps, to raise the heir to the
but also dangerous.
And also, it's a double-edged sword, of course. Yeah, he could have just given him up, got sort of brownie points immediately and done that, but he decided not to, and took him in, and it was spared, So, and there are a few parallels in history, aren't there, where people's childhoods, or very early childhoods even, are filled with adventure and daring. Sort of their life is on the. Well, I think of William the Conqueror. He was sort of spirited away at various points in his very early childhood from people or factions that wanted him dead.
Oh yeah. William the Conqueror shouldn't have been able to hold the throne of Normandy, but the dukedom of Normandy. But I don't want to go into a different story while we're in this one. But you're right. And it's because of the way power politics works. If things start moving, then other people have to react and move in response. And this means that, it really is very hierarchical and about whose relationship to who. And that's the only thing that matters. So it doesn't matter if you're a child, which is why you have betrothed marriages between, like two kids who have never met each other for like 15 years until they get old enough and then they get married, like it's very predeterministic. I don't like.
Yeah, family, blood and family really matter. But I just mentioned William the Conqueror as an example because I could do the sort of armchair psychology thing, trying to get in the mic. If your childhood or your earliest memories or the things you're told sort of indelibly marked on your mind in your formative years, and one of them is that your life is in danger all the time. There are people out there that happily or may even be being paid a lot of money to kill you. So be aware of that. I mean, again, you or I, I'm sure I can certainly speak for myself, got nowhere near that in my formative years. So, never had that baggage. But it would have, it's an important thing because in the end, Pyrrhus has got a reputation for being, again, like Alexander, clement and nice to his friends, but also insanely brutal. Chopping people up. It's a crazy thing. Actually chopping lots of people up by hand.
Yeah, but that's on the battlefield.
Yeah, but
that's not the same thing. Like if it like the
I'm
way
not
that
saying
you
you just
say
did
that,
it at home for a laugh.
Well, that's the thing. You say it as if there's some character flaw with Pyrrhus, when in fact what he's done there is eminently virtuous from all angles. He's clement to his friends and the people he defeats, and he is also a great warrior. So he's fulfilling the roles that are set for him completely virtuously. It's just the Greeks put high prize on martial prowess.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose maybe one or either of us or both of us in a way are sort of doing that thing where we're sort of, imprinting modern values and then trying really hard not to. And then, because that thing of whether it's in battle or not, of killing people, smashing your sword through their face.
Pyrrhus is fine with that.
I mean, it's just... well, for some people, it's absolutely fine, isn't it? And for some people, it's sort of not. I mean, what's the point I'm trying to make here? It's that, I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that there's that parallel with Alexander where you can be extremely affable and charming and witty and as brutal as a human can be. It's all held within the same person. It's interesting.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is, I think that there's a kind of consent to battle. Like there's a kind of, like, both sides. You can't have a battle unless both sides stand and fight, right? This is one of the main problems. You've got to pin your enemy and force them to fight if you're chasing someone, or they'll just move because it takes you an afternoon to line up your army, and in that time they've just all walked off and now they're 20 miles away. So there has to be will to fight on both sides, unless you've caught someone in an ambush and they can't escape, obviously. So when it comes to sort of battlefield prowess, the way the Greeks look at it, I think it's viewed as a noble thing. War is viewed as a noble thing because it's understood that the other chap is trying to kill you as well. And, not to spoil anything, but jumping ahead, Pyrrhus defeats one of the Macedonian champions in single combat, and the Macedonians think he's fucking wonderful, but it's their champion that he's just defeated, and they end up, defecting to him later. Spoilers, by the way. And it's a virtue being extolled because it's understood that this is manly competition and this is heroic and this is what men are supposed to do. And because all of them have agreed to be there, it's not like victimization, and so it's not the kind of, it's more like a really rough sport, and another thing that people should remember is most people on a battlefield didn't die. Like most people who went to a battle came home alive, like most of the time. So it's important to remember that most people in a battle don't die.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I agree when you say it's a bit like a sport. And it seems that way because, especially in this period, even more than many other periods, even more than Alexander's age, just a generation ago, they have single combats quite a lot. Pyrrhus has it a few times. And I got this quote I wanted to make sure I read out, but here's a good point, I suppose, to read out from Plutarch. It's in the middle of a battle, someone sort of offered him out. Another champion has sort of just done that. And it says, quote, Pyrrhus, incensed at this, returned with his guards, and with a visage so fierce with anger and so besmeared with blood that it was dreadful to look upon, made his way through the battalions, notwithstanding their remonstrances. Thus rushing upon the barbarian, he prevented his blow and gave him such a stroke on the head with his sword that with the strength of his arm and the excellent temper of the weapon, he cleaved him quite down, and in one moment the parts fell asunder. End quote.
Now, I love that quote.
Which means
that's when that's when he's fleeing from Sicily, being harassed. Being harassed by the Mamertines. But it's probably overdone that he cut a barbarian in two. But I think that if there's one thing that we can take away from the life of Pyrrhus, is that he was a fucking badass. Like, this guy's entire life was war and combat. This is what he trained for. This is what he became, and he was really quite amazing at it. Like, even Alexander does. He sounds more intimidating than Alexander. Alexander is obviously a great warrior himself, but he doesn't get the kind of like descriptive nature that Pyrrhus gets, but in his biographies, and I think there must be something to that. I mean, and Pyrrhus fights loads of single combats. Like, he's constantly up for it.
Yeah, so in Plutarch, loads of times, 4 or 5 times, he says specifically that Pyrrhus looks like something from another world, a demon, like a creature that's just like this war monster. Like, he's not like a normal man. He's crazy. And in that particular story, he's supposed to have, if it's right, and I've read another translation which puts it more clearly, it's meant to say that he cut him down the middle, long ways from head. Yeah. All the way down like the sternum, all the way into 2 bits. Like, that is comical. It's cartoonish. It's like something out of anime or a manga or something.
But I mean, if you actually saw that, but that as well. The great thing about this is, it's the Mamertines, wasn't it? Is it the Mamertines or?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, it was the Mamertines. Yeah, who were chasing them out of Sicily. That scared off the Mamertine army, didn't it? because they were basically aghast at like Pyrrhus looking at him like he was one more than man, I think Plutarch says. And basically they all ran off because the Epirots are getting really hard pressed at the rear guard, and Pyrrhus is there fighting at the rear. He gets wounded on the head, and then just one of them calls him out for being a pussy, basically. Pyrrhus gets really pissed off, goes there, cuts him in two, and the Mamertine army just goes, okay, that's enough for today then. So, yeah, I mean, this guy, Pyrrhus must have been some sort of fucking maniac. Must have been a very, very valiant warrior, sorry, is what I meant to say. But no, this is why I love Pyrrhus.
Yeah, a few times where you think, well, wait a minute. So he must have been massively strong then. He must have had shoulders like basketballs. He must have been like this really, really strong dude. Like, I don't know. I think like the sharpest or best sword is actually like a Japanese katana type thing, isn't it?
Jesus, no, we're not getting into the no. Yeah, like it does. Yeah, no, I doubt he cut anyone in two. I agree.
Yeah.
God, you've just started a war in the comments.
Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We go back to Pyrrhus's childhood. Sorry, it was so he's brought up in Glaucus's court until about 11 or 12, when and then the Illyrians invade Epirus and install him as king, and he's like 11. So again, this armchair psychology thing. What sort of a person does it make where being told you're a king, even if you're like a puppet king? Not many people have that, so it creates a specific type of psychology, I think, or in the adult person.
I mean, he sat under a sword of Damocles. At any point, something could go horribly wrong, and the sword will drop and kill him, which is what happens shortly, actually, isn't it?
Well, that's right. So he rules as a puppet king for 4, 5, 6 years or something. And when he's about 16 or 17, there's a wedding in Illyria. And he goes there because he's sort of supposed to, or has to, is ordered to. But he goes there, and the Molossians, the people, rise up and overthrow his rule. It doesn't seem that it's particularly against him personally. That they resented being under the yoke of the Illyrians.
Weren't there other nobles, or another faction?
Yeah, other claimants. The guy Neoptolemus is one of them.
That's it. Yeah. I thought that was part of that. Like, essentially, he led like an insurrection. A coup, I suppose we'd call it.
Yeah, it's all bound up together. Yeah. It's complicated. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. But this is the point where sort of Glaucus and the Illyrians aren't able to reinvade it and install him. So he's sort of out on a limb a bit. So what he does is he goes down to southern Greece, the Peloponnese, that's being ruled by the Antigonid faction. So Antigonus and his son Demetrius, his sort of general son. Yeah. So he goes there and he meets up with him, and actually he's his brother-in-law. We're talking earlier about incestuous nature of all this, and Demetrius has married, I think, his sister, Pyrrhus' sister, something like that. And he's his brother-in-law now. So they cross over into sort of main Asia Minor, into modern day Turkey, and they meet up with the great man Antigonus himself, who's at this point, ruler of a massive chunk of Alexander's empire, one of the top three, 4 men in the world, basically, essentially. And so Pyrrhus is firmly in his faction. And so now cut back to the wars of the successors. At this point, Antigonus is sort of so powerful that everyone else, it's like when you play Risk, when you realise someone's about to hold Asia or something, everyone gangs up on them. And that's exactly what happens. Literally everyone, like Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus, and Cassander as well, I think, if he's still going, all gang up on him. And there's like the great battle of Ipsus, like it's the big set piece, sort of one of the main crescendos of the wars of the successors is Ipsus in 301, I think.
And this is hundreds of thousands of people on both sides, isn't it?
Massive, yeah. I think the biggest one of the whole set of wars, I think.
Yeah, but like rivaling what the Persian emperor would bring, It's like these are enormous armies.
Yeah, I think one side had like 65,000 men and like 15,000 cavalry, 7,500 cavalry on each wing. It's pretty big.
It's colossal. It's fucking colossal.
Yeah, and so Antigonus and Demetrius, with Pyrrhus as a lieutenant, a young Pyrrhus, he's only 17, lose that battle. They lose at the Battle of Ipsus, and that's the point where the Antigonid faction or dynasty isn't done. It's a very low ebb for them, but they're not done. But at this point, that's where you mentioned earlier he was sent as a prisoner, not a prisoner, a hostage in inverted commas, down to Ptolemy. Mm-hmm. So we mentioned like the nature of what that means to be a hostage. It's not necessarily that, but again, I just mention at this point the complicated nature of it. So Ptolemy, and he's not necessarily good friends with all the other factions. So it's funny that Pyrrhus sort of can play factions off against each other. So he's sort of in there with Demetrius and Antigonus, but he's also in there, so to speak, with Ptolemy, and they're not friends. So it's like this complicated web.
Yeah. Well, there's something interesting about Pyrrhus. It seems that he was quite a likable guy.
Yeah.
He seems to have had like good friends throughout his life, and he seems to have got on well with basically all of the other factions that he encounters. And it's really interesting how he's got a bizarre kind of I don't know, kind of tolerance about him, I suppose. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but he doesn't seem to be one of those characters who drives you completely mental, you know. Like, you know, some people are very polarizing and divisive. Other people are quite like bland in that regard, and Pyrrhus is actually one of those guys who's quite bland about this sort of stuff. He doesn't seem to have really particularly enjoyed the intrigue, does he?
Yeah, I think he might. I think he probably would have been quite charming, even. Yeah. I think that's said a few times. Well, again, it's one of those things. He was brought up from a very early age in a foreign court where you would probably want to ingratiate yourself, wouldn't you? And then he finds himself in the same situation with Ptolemy. Well, the best thing to do is ingratiate yourself. You wouldn't want to alienate yourself necessarily. And he's good at that. People like him. In fact, he's betrothed to one of Ptolemy's daughters, Antigone.
Yeah. And he impresses them with hunting and things like this because he's an athletic man. So he impresses them with his prowess, you know.
Yeah, and it seems he's likable. Again, it's like I said before that the juxtaposition of being not personable, should we say, on the battlefield, and then being highly personable. And
look, like it's not that he's not personable on a battlefield.
I know.
To his own men, he's highly personable, right? If you're going to be in a battle, like you want your general, like I mean, like he is first in storming castles and things like this. And if you see the general going over, you'd be like, oh, shit. Well, at least he's going to kill a lot of people, you know, because like you've seen him literally tearing through people as he fights. So you're thinking, well, I mean, at least we've got this giant warrior on our side. You know, it could be worse, you know. So it would be something that would rally you. I think, you know, it'd be.
Yeah, no, sure. I'm not really trying to be disparaging. I suppose I'm just trying to make the point.
I told you I do a lot of Pyrrhus apologetics, so you know.
Probably hammering the point home a bit too over gilding the lily, should we say? But people that we know that are like erudite at a dinner party and witty and funny, they're not usually the same people that are handy in a fight. You know,
yeah,
it's not usually the same person. That's all I'm saying.
But yeah, well, absolutely. But that's because we don't value the same thing as the Greeks. Like, or you know, all of these men would be expected to fight in war. All of these noble men would expect to be fighting in wars. It would be just a part of their life. The Greeks were incredibly martial, as these cultures go anyway. Very, very, you know, martial culture. They value a warrior's ability to be a warrior. And I mean, it's baked into their myths. You know, it's Achilles. Alexander used to sleep with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow. I'm sure Pyrrhus would have done something very similar. You know, it's a heroic culture that they're in. They believe in this stuff, which is why they go and actually do it. And then you get some of the most immense stories. In fact, this is one of them, you know.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, Alexander and then Pyrrhus as well. Even more exaggerated version of the things you're supposed to be good at is fighting and sort of poetry and things like that. They're two things that don't go together in our culture necessarily. But yeah, absolutely, that was their culture.
Yeah, cool. But there's no reason you shouldn't expect this sort of thing to be, you know, like Pyrrhus is a Renaissance man, as it were, you know, of the current contemporary time. It's you know, but like I say, he goes over to Ptolemy and he's generally quite well received. He's liked. He gets to marry was it Bernice or something?
Antigone. It's the mum is Bernice. Yeah.
Right, there we go. Like I said, it's been a long time since I've read it, but
and they get on famously.
Yes, yeah, and so Pyrrhus is, you know, generally I suppose probably like handsome, you know, big and strong, charming. He's got royal lineage. He's literally got everything fucking going for him. You know, Chad McChaddington here.
Yeah, he has got weird teeth though.
Yeah,
There's a bit. There's a bit in Plutarch actually. They don't actually describe what they look like very often. Sometimes you get a whole biography and there's no description of like their face or what they look like or their build.
yeah.
But Plutarch does give us a little bit about Pyrrhus. If I read it out, it's just a couple of lines. He says, quote, Pyrrhus had an air of majesty rather terrible than august. Instead of teeth in his upper jaw, he had one continued bone marked with small lines resembling the divisions of a row of teeth.
Right. So I remember when I was in my 20s, I used to frequent history forums and talk about this sort of stuff. And I had inquired about this specifically. And what the consensus was from this discussion board was that this probably means that Pyrrhus lost his teeth in fights or battles or something like that at some point, and a bone replacement with teeth apparently marked on would have just been aesthetic, or maybe even to help him chew.
Right.
Who knows? But it basically a replacement, they think. But,
well, I always just assumed that the hundreds of years between Pyrrhus being alive and Plutarch writing, there's just bullshit was just made up in that meantime. That's what I assumed that story was, really.
It could be, because Plutarch was writing like 300 years later, so could just be horseshit, you know. But it is, I mean, like, you know, who knows? But as that aside, we don't, you know, that's the only thing about Pyrrhus that's like, you know, weird, right?
Yeah. No, it's supposed to have been. I think he was supposed to have been, good looking and big and strong and sort of good company. Good guy.
And well liked, you know, capable. So anyway,
and looked after his friends. And that sort of thing, So he ends up going back to, well, he's liked so much that Ptolemy sort of bankrolls him to go back to Epirus, and he goes back there, and there's the guy there, Neoptolemus, and some sort of agreement is made where there'll be joint kings.
Yeah, so he goes back with, like, was it 12,000 soldiers or something, which is not like a huge army, but it's certainly significant. But yeah, him and Neoptolemus come to a power sharing arrangement that doesn't work very well for either of them, does it?
No. I mean, in history, that very, very seldom ever lasts for any amount of time, does it?
Yeah.
Unless you're actually brothers, sometimes, but...
Yeah, rarely. But even then, you get, you know, like Attila. Doesn't Attila murder his own brother? So their power sharing arrangement, it always ends up with one murdering the other. It's just, you know, I guess it's just inevitable.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just trying to find the quote. I got it here. Plutarch says, quote, but on occasion of a solemn sacrifice, he invited Neoptolemus to supper and took that opportunity to kill him.
Wasn't that because didn't he discover Neoptolemus had been plotting?
Yeah. And apparently, when he did that, there wasn't like a big faction that rose up against him. Everyone was happy.
Yeah, because Neoptolemus was a shit.
And Pyrrhus is like the returning prodigal son. Like he's the real deal. You know, he is actually part of the older bloodline, and it's happy. And you know, he goes on to remain the king of Epirus for the rest of his life. You know, decades. So it's the start of something big.
Yeah, and like, you know, Pyrrhus is quite mild mannered. You know, so he's not the sort of. I can't imagine he would have been a terrible king. If anything, I think he probably would have been an absentee king, which, to be fair, is probably the best kind of king, because then at least he's not taxing you and taking your shit and bothering you. You know, go do something. Don't you have a realm to conquer or something? It's like, yes, I do. And you know, he sells off, and you go, right, okay, you know, break out the wine. You know, but anyway, yes. But yeah, Neoptolemus is a shit, and he was plotting against Pyrrhus, though, wasn't he? So, and Pyrrhus discovered this. That's why he did it. Prudence, really, kind of had to do that. Again, more Pyrrhus apologetics.
Yeah, and well, so from that point, you know, Pyrrhus becomes king, and he's a restless soul, isn't he? He doesn't want to sort of sit still for too long.
Yes, he likes the action. He likes things to happen. He likes doing things.
So I suppose like the first sort of section of his reign is a battle with Macedonia and Cassandra and Cassandra's sons. Sort of the first sort of big events of his life, or his reign rather. Yeah. And so Cassandra dies, and his two sons, two warring sons. There's one called Antipater. I think the other one's called Alexander. But basically it's a bit of a mess in Macedonia and mainland Greece. And Pyrrhus, like everyone else, covets the Macedonian throne. So if he sees it sort of weakened, he, as much as anybody else, wants to maybe try and get a slice of it.
Oh, but yeah, totally. And the thing is as well, because he's Alexander's cousin, he can probably gin up some kind of claim to it as well. Like,
yeah, he's got a semi-legitimate claim.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, well, I mean, this comes to a head a couple of times. So he's not a true Macedonian, but being of the line and being an Epiroi is pretty good. If
it's close enough, yeah.
Yeah, if you're looking at that, or a Persian or a Bactrian or something, then of course he's better. But if you've got somebody who's actually in the bloodline of Alexander, that is better. But
yeah, and the fact that the men like him as a commander as well, because like Pyrrhus is like a soldier's general in many ways, you know. And this is something we see in his war with Macedon, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, as his adult life and career goes on, he garners this reputation increasingly more for a great general, and you know, men just will flock to him as it goes on. This is quite early on, so he's already got a bit of a reputation for that, but not massively yet because it's still early doors. But yet, on the scene at the same time as this is the Antigonid faction, Demetrius, you know. Who's sort of his brother-in-law, and they fought together at Ipsus. They fought side by side, perhaps, in the cavalry at Ipsus. And they're old buddies, but
rivalry start being created. Jealousy. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. Well, so Antigonus has sent Demetrius to conquer the Greek theatre, and he's done quite well so far. He's taken over southern Greece, apart from Sparta, at least nominally, taken over all of Peloponnesia and gone up into, and he's played the politics game with these two warring sons of Cassander, and he eventually beats them and he becomes the king of Macedonia. If you look him up on Wikipedia, I think it says Demetrius of Macedonia, Demetrius the First of Macedonia, but he wasn't actually king of Macedonia for all that long. And
but anyway, the effective control of the countries is always dubious as well. Like you know, like he might walk into Pella and go into the throne room and say, "Right, I'm the king," you know, but what does that really mean, you know? And then like 2 years later, some other guy comes in and does the same. Like, you know, who knows what that really means? But anyway, sorry, Karen.
So, there's the period where Pyrrhus, a couple of times in his life, but one time at this point, he gets to sort of invade. Macedonia is just purely weakened. Their armies are in other places. He just needs to head directly east, and he just goes straight into the heart of Macedonia. But Demetrius comes up and meets him.
And just for anyone who's not looking at the map yet, we're talking like 50 miles. You know, like it's not very far at all. Like it was 160 miles from Athens to Sparta, and it's definitely less time from Macedon to Epirus. You know, it's very, very close.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It's not a huge amount of ground you have to cover here. Yeah, we talk about a tight little theatre there. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it makes sense how close they are in the blood ties and tribes and families and all that sort of thing. Yeah, because they are neighbours, really are.
It's like the English and the Welsh. You know, it's really, really close. They share a border that, you know, you don't have to go very far. There's a huge amount of cultural diffusion between the two.
Yeah, huge. So he gets pushed back, though. Demetrius pushes Pyrrhus back. But then it's another point where people realise that Demetrius and his faction are a bit too strong, and they gang up against him. And Lysimachus, who's up in Thrace, you know, just sort of hovering to the north. As you can imagine, Seleucus always hovering out to the east, and Ptolemy always hovering down to the south. There's Lysimachus always hovering up there in Thrace, and he pushes back down against it. Again, just a classic sort of ding-dong back and forth part of these wars of the successors. It's a sort of a good example on a smaller scale of how it all pans out on the macro scale as well. This sort of back and forth and factions and people changing sides and intrigue and all this sort of thing. It's many layers of detail to it, but in the end, his position, Pyrrhus's position, is quite strong, but he's not really in a position to take on Lysimachus, and he's sort of persuaded to go on some other adventures, and you know, that's one of the hallmarks of Pyrrhus's life, and he goes off on foreign adventures. He actually gets to do that. There's one line, just a real quick line from Plutarch. He says, quote, "Like Achilles, he could not endure inaction." And then it's a quote, I think, from the Iliad. "He pined in dull repose, his heart indignant, bade the scene change to war, to wounds and death. End quote. Bit over the top, but he was just sort of looking for adventures, and that's when the people from Italy, he gets an envoy from Tarentum. The Tarentines send him an envoy saying, can you help us? You know, you've got a reputation for being a great commander already, you know, a genius really, almost already, even as a young man. Can you help us against the Romans?
Yeah. Well, I feel that we've skipped over a bit there. Because didn't Pyrrhus's wife defect to Demetrius?
Yeah.
Wasn't that before the Romans?
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, go on. That was before the Romans, right? Before he fought the Romans.
Yeah. So if you want to delve in a little bit on the Pyrrhus's relationship with Demetrius,
why not?
It goes into like his so he was like I say, like a close buddy, his brother-in-law, and fought side by side, and they end up bitter enemies. And Pyrrhus has got many wives. That was the norm. And one of them is like the heiress or the ruler, even, I think, or her family is, of Corcyra, the island of Corcyra, which we mentioned, haven't we? And I think the Peloponnesian War video.
Wait, are we talking about the daughter of Agathocles?
Yeah, I think that's her. Yeah,
because Corcyra's her dowry, isn't it?
That's it. That's right.
Yeah.
She's the one.
So Agathocles is a famous tyrant of Syracuse, who fought the Carthaginians who fought the Carthaginians out of Greek-controlled Sicily and ended up invading North Africa unsuccessfully, in his long wars with the Carthaginians. He came from Himera, which is just a little small Greek city in Sicily, and ended up becoming the tyrant of Syracuse with a body of men, like mercenaries taking over cities. But he was actually quite competent, in all fairness, and he was actually quite effective. The Syracuse would have much worse tyrants than him later on. But yeah, it's his daughter, and Corcyra, which is now Corfu, is her dowry, and she runs off. Why did she run off again? I can't remember offhand.
Yeah, well, so her reasoning was that she was sick of being one of many wives, and that his other barbarian wives were just too revolting. She couldn't stay.
You mean they were hot, right? That's what they were hot, and Pyrrhus preferred them. Let's be real.
Yeah, and she runs off, leaves him for Demetrius.
Yeah, what a bitch. He'll have to take comfort in his other wives.
Yeah. And the island of Corcyra sort of flips to Demetrius's faction along with it, which is a bit annoying. But just one quick aside, actually, in Plutarch's Life of Demetrius, I just read the other week, I'd forgotten, it mentions just a funny sort of detail. Demetrius has got, it seems, some sort of fetish for MILFs.
Does it?
I'm not joking. It's literally like he takes many a wife or many a mistress who's like quite old, and people are like, dude, she's a bit old. Like, what are you doing? And he's like, no, she's beautiful.
Oh, Demetrius, the rescuer of women. Right, okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Good on you, Demetrius.
I thought I'd throw that in there. But yeah, I suppose we are missing out a fair few bits. Yeah, like the back and forth, actually, the sort of the back and forth of the politics between Epirus and Macedonia is detailed and interesting, because how can Pyrrhus go away to Italy for many a year and know that his seat in Epirus is going to be relatively safe, and even Lysimachus or the other factions give him thousands of men or loads of money to go and do it. It's sort of in their interest to sort of have him out of the way for a while, a few years. So it's that sort of dynamic.
Yeah, well, it's entirely to their benefit for him to fuck off somewhere else, because you don't want this giant, man Chad who's an amazing general who all the men like and who might well invade tomorrow because he gets bored easily, like some autistic twitcher. Like, you want him somewhere else, Go to fight the Roman barbarians in the West. Yes, do that. They want you to be king of Sicily. Go do that. Fuck off. He's a nuisance. A nuisance to good governance.
A nuisance to himself and others, just like Alexander.
But a charming one that you probably like having at dinner parties.
Yeah, it's this bit in Plutarch where there's a little anecdote, one of the ones you probably want to mention, where he's got one of his advisors and one of his close friends, Cineas, says to him, like,
right, yes, okay, Han. Before we, this is one of those things where Pyrrhus gets absolutely owned by one of his own advisors. It's really charming, and he doesn't get angry about it, right? He doesn't get angry. He just can't refute it because he's made a good point. And honestly, a lot of this really speaks to the sort of character of Pyrrhus, and he seems to be quite a lovable guy, and all of his friends speak to him frankly. You know, they don't like there are rulers in the ancient world that you would not even dare open your mouth to, but Pyrrhus is one of the lads, it seems, you know. And Cineas says to him, so what are we invading this country for? You know, Sicily or Italy or whatever. We'll defeat the Romans, and then we'll go on and use the resources of Italy to conquer Sicily, and then we'll come back and we'll reconquer Macedon after we'll go all across North Africa. In fact, we'll conquer Carthage, we'll go down Libya, we'll take Egypt, and come back around, capture Macedon, and then we're done. And he's like, okay, well, what then? It's like, well, then we'll live at our ease and drink all day and entertain each other with pleasant conversation. And Cineas is like, but we can do that now without all of this hassle and all of these hardships and bloodshed. But we could just go and have a beer. And Pyrrhus is like, shut up, Cineas.
Yeah, he does take it in quite good humour. He doesn't get angry with him or anything.
No, but he's just completely owned him.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, he's totally painted him into a corner, like, perfectly. Because apparently this Cineas, if you want to say it, is like really, really eloquent.
He's his chief diplomat. Yeah,
he says, the quote, Plutarch says that Pyrrhus says of him, quote, that Cineas had gained him more cities by his address than he had won by his arms. Yeah. End quote. So he totally pones him there. He said, why he does that thing, and then what? And then we'll do Italy, and then what? It's like a little kid. And then we'll do Carthage, and then what? Yeah, and at the end, it's just like, well, can't we just do that now? But it is sort of a philosophical point, though. Why do anything, though? Yeah, well, if you're independently wealthy.
If the purpose is just to, be able to live at your ease and drink all day, then he's already the king. He can do that already. So why doesn't he just do that with all these other troubles and labors? And Pyrrhus doesn't have an answer because fundamentally it's core to his character and the culture he comes from that they should be fighting. They don't know what else they should be doing. You know, that's all this is. But doesn't have we skipped past doesn't Pyrrhus become king of Macedon before going to Italy, or is that afterwards?
Both, I think. He doesn't actually. So there's that bit when earlier on I said he sort of invades and Demetrius comes up to meet him. He's sort of, there's a period there where Lysimachus comes down. It's complicated. I'm not sure if I've got it perfectly right in my mind, but Lysimachus comes down, and at that point, Pyrrhus is king of Macedonia. He sort of concedes it and goes back to Epirus, concedes it to Lysimachus. So he has been at least nominally for a small amount of time. He has been king of Macedon.
Yeah, because he invades Macedon and Demetrius marches out to meet him, but they miss each other, don't they? Like by a mistake of the ways, as Plutarch describes it, they go past each other, but Pyrrhus encounters like the backup army under Pantacus or something, and they fight. Pantacus challenges Pyrrhus to individual combat. Pyrrhus wins. They all run away. Don't a bunch of the soldiers, out of admiration for Pyrrhus, go over to his army?
Yeah, so this is the first battle where he's the commander. He's been in a battle before. He was at Ipsus, but this is the first one where he's the king. And he can sort of call out by name. That happens many times, actually. There's a bit in just earlier in the wars when I think maybe Eumenes just shouts out to, or Craterus or somebody just shouts out to the captains and lieutenants on the other side by name, because they know each other. Like, some of these guys go back again to the age of Philip. They've gone to the ends of the earth with Alexander and back, and now they're fighting each other. Crazy. Yeah,
and they don't. I'm sure a lot of them don't want to be, but and then him and Lysimachus have shared rulership over Macedon until Lysimachus drives Pyrrhus out as well.
Yeah, he has to. He sort of cedes it back to him. Yeah.
But this is where Pyrrhus gets the epithet the eagle, isn't it? Because he defeats Pantacus and takes like thousands of prisoners, which he then doesn't he release? I'm sure he releases them. I feel like I'm sure he releases these prisoners.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just trying to find that the actual proper eagle quote. Yeah, you're quite right.
Yeah, and he says, you know, if I'm an eagle, it's only because you are my wings, or something like that. My men are my wings, something like that.
Yeah.
You know, so but again, he totally plays it back to the army. It's like, you know, they're venerating him. It's like, no, it's only because of you guys. Your arms are my wings. You know what I mean? It's not all me, and that's a really humbling position for like a you know, king to take, isn't it? You know, it's really it's charming. I really think it speaks to the very, very, you know, good character of Pyrrhus, especially when it comes to his own soldiers and his own men. He seems to genuinely like the people around him, and he seems to be like, again, this all seems like sport to Pyrrhus. You know, this is like a manly sport that's honorable and decent. This isn't, you know, this isn't like hatred and fell raiding. Like he releases, you know, 5,000 Macedonian prisoners and stuff, and this just makes the Macedonians think, well, this Pyrrhus guy's fucking great. You know, like,
yeah, it doesn't piss him off.
Macedon, you know. Like, because the king, like you say, you know, the kingship of each country, each nation is changing like that. You know, it's like, oh god, we've had 5 kings. Oh, this guy seems all right. You know, and like there's a charm to him. I really find it. You know, it's like, oh, he's so sweet. But anyway, yeah. So after he gets shoved out by Lysimachus, that's when he gets the request from the Tarentines, isn't it?
Yeah, or the eagle line is, he says, if I am an eagle, you have made me one, for it is upon your arms, upon your wings that I have risen so high. And yeah, you're right, it's just quite likeable. The people like him. Like, you know, when he faces it and he defeats a Macedonian army, they're like, oh, well, good on you. They're not pissed off with him. He's great.
Well played, old boy.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like a game. You know, that really is quite a good analogy. Another just quick bit on his character that he was likable was that there was apparently some guy, it's just this point in Plutarch's, that's right there. There was some guy who's apparently just talking trash, talking smack about him.
Can I tell this again? Because I can see, I haven't read Plutarch in like 10 years, but I can remember these things because these are such interesting little stories that let me do it by memory, right? So there's this guy who's going around Epirus, and he's just, like you say, trash talking Pyrrhus constantly, and I don't even know what his problem with Pyrrhus was. I can't even remember what it was, but if he basically, loads of people, you know, his friends come to the court and say, look, sire, there's this dude who's going around saying all these terrible things at you. What should we do? Should we exile him? And Pyrrhus is like, no, better him say these things here than have him wander in the whole world saying these things. So we'll just keep him. It's like, what a response.
Yeah.
Like, what a genial man, you know. What a soft soul he is. Like, no, probably best that he just stays here and says these things. Don't want the neighbours thinking that.
Yeah, just really clement, isn't it? It would have been the easiest thing in the world for him to snap his fingers and somebody would have just run him through on his behalf, or just exile him, even just throw him in prison. You don't need a trial, nothing like that. But no, that's how he reacts to it. Quite enlightened, really, isn't it?
It's gentle. It's honestly gentle. You know, he strikes me as the kind of guy who, you know, if he's walking along and a cat meows, he'll lean down and pet the cat. You know, he strikes me as that kind of man, even though he's a violent fucking warlord. But like, you know,
if he saw you kicking the cat, he would hack you into 10 pieces immediately.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's the thing, though, isn't it? He's not a bloodthirsty man. You know, he's after honorable combat with, you know, champions. That's what he's looking for, like in Homeric style. That's what Pyrrhus values. He's not like he doesn't want to torture anyone or anything like that. I mean, does he torture anyone? I don't think he ever tortures anyone.
Not that I can recall. No, but that's a very good point. It's still in the Homeric mold, like the Age of Alexander, very much so. Good point.
Yes, and that's, you can tell that this is his driving principles. So.
Yeah, so I mean, it moves on to the point where we're saying the Tarentines are asking for help. So Pyrrhus decides to accept the invitation to pop over to Italy, because we'll put a map up, but it's just a short hop across, isn't it, from Albania to the hill of Italy. Yeah,
and it's important to remember that the south of Italy is Hellenized to a great extent. Tarentum is the only Spartan colony. The only colony that Sparta ever sent out, and they appeal for aid because The Romans have begun. They've conquered the center of Italy at this point. The Romans, the history of the early Roman Republic is absolutely fascinating, and the wars they have with the Samnites and the other tribes in there. They've probably just concluded the Third Samnite War at this point, and they're basically busy taking over Italy and establishing the sort of Roman world order that everyone is familiar with later on. And the Tarentines had a treaty with Rome, if I recall correctly, that the Romans breached by like sending boats into their harbor or something. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So there was sort of this, what they call Magna Graecia, just sort of Greater Greece, lots of settlements around southern Italy. And yeah, this is our first sort of foray into the world of Rome, and when they take over the Latins and the Etruscans, and the Samnites, and before this period they'd already been invaded by Brennus. That was like a big thing, a scar on the Roman psyche by the age of Pyrrhus, that they had been actually Rome had been sacked by Brennus as an important.
That was in 391, and then Pyrrhus is like 280. So it like 100 or so years ago, previously. So Rome was recovered by this point.
Yeah, it's something in their history, though, that sort of caused a scar where they're like, we don't want that to happen again. We'll make sure if anyone ever, because Pyrrhus does end up, jumping ahead a little bit here, but he does end up marching very close to Rome. So actually jumping ahead too much, but so he goes across.
What you're saying is the Romans are very concerned with their security. That's and this is the Roman worldview. It's like conquering the world in self-defense. Whatever's on the border of Rome is potentially, whatever's on the other side of that is potentially a threat to the city, and therefore there are always reasons manufactured by the Romans why they have to go to war with someone and conquer them. The conquering the world in self-defense is very much part of the Roman mind. They didn't like just arbitrarily declaring war. It's they felt it would be immoral, but they were going to declare war anyway, because eventually, something like George Bush. Invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. It's like, it's a self-defense war. We have to conquer them. It's like, okay, now what? There's someone on the other side of this hill. Now we have to conquer them. And that's how the Roman Empire was constructed, essentially.
So by the age of Pyrrhus, Rome was already sort of a well-oiled machine. I've used that turn of phrase before, but they've had they're halfway through or towards the end of these Italian wars, so they're not novices. Pyrrhus has actually come up against equals at least. It's not, these aren't just like ragtag bands of once great men like the Spartans or something. These are actually sort of professional. But so when he jumps over to the
very quickly on that. For anyone listening, Rome is a republic, and it's already got the sort of incorporative roots that you see really blooming in about 100 years after this, in fact. So Rome is capable of raising a lot of men because republics seem to be able to do that. There's a patriotism in the republic, in the fact that it's a republic. Whereas
strong identity.
Yeah, exactly. And it was the same for Athens becoming a democracy, where it's described as the soldiers suddenly becoming more effective, because they're fighting for themselves effectively, and I think that's how the Romans viewed it. And you can see the Roman Republic, it appears to be a team effort. The secession of the plebs, I think, is where it shows most. Early Rome, it was a team effort. It was Rome against the world. That's how they viewed themselves. And it was a really strong ethos, and I think republics do this. They have this kind of ethos. It's the republic against everything, and I think that's one of the reasons that America is so strong. It's a really strong ethos that builds dedication, and so the early Roman Republic is filled with these stories of men like sacrificing their own sons for the republic. I can't remember the name of the Roman general, but basically his son had disobeyed orders, the laws, and the guy was forced to put his own son to death in order to stay consistent with the laws. This general had to put his own son to death because he told the troops not to move, and the son saw that there was a victory to be had, took his soldiers, won the victory, and then gets back elated, and then his father puts him to death for violating the rules. And that's the sort of Roman ethos, the very, very stern, austere, very highly conservative, austere, like Roman ethos that is one of those things lamented later on, when the republics become corrupt and rich. But yeah, the whole thing's really fascinating, and this is why I was saying, like, I don't know whether Alexander would have had such an easy time, because the Romans were not like the Persians. They were different people with different ideas, and they were hardy, man. They people think that Rome's success is built on, you know, a string of unbroken victories. Like, no, Rome was not Alexander. Rome's success came with a punch in the face every step of the way. Like, Rome takes one step forward, catastrophic defeat. You know, 30,000 men dead, right? What happens? They just raise another army, and like bloody-minded, like idiots, they just carry on with the war until their opponents like, geez, all right, fine, all right, you know. And this is why Rome wins. It's not because their soldiers were that much better than everyone else. It's just that they didn't quit. It's really insufferable. But this is what Pyrrhus goes on to learn, in fact.
Yeah, and somehow had a mechanism to just raise more men at the drop of a hat. Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean about the patriotism of the Republic. You know, like they can say, look, the Republic is in danger. The Republic is us, the people. It's like it's franchising the people, even though it's not like, you know, universal suffrage or anything. But there's a kind of franchise there. They see themselves as being part of that, and the secession of the plebs being a form of class warfare against the aristocrats. So they said, look, we're not going to come out and fight until you give us what we want, to, you know, fair treatment. And they have to concede on it. You know, they need the plebs to fill the ranks. You know, so it's just really, really interesting how the Roman Republic is different to the Greeks in that way. But because the Greeks are actually complete ethno-nationalists. Like, you know, to be an Athenian means you must have been born to Athenian parents. Like, there's no incorporation there. You know, the best you can be is a metic. But yeah, anyway, so that's the Pyrrhus learns about the patriotic and hardy nature of Rome quite harshly, doesn't he?
Yeah. One of the things I want to just build on what you were saying there about is about monarchy. The Greeks quite into their monarchies. You know, Alexander was a king, Pyrrhus is a king, but the Romans had rejected kingship. Absolutely, that was one of the things you sort of was saying, wasn't it, about the plebs and everything?
Absolutely.
And that parallel with America as well, that you explicitly reject kings, and that to be a king is sort of a dirty word to a lot of Americans, and it would have been to those Romans as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the founding of the Roman Republic is because Tarquin the Proud had raped the daughter of some other nobleman, you know, with impunity, and everyone was like, you can't just go around raping people, you know, and this, you know, you can't, like, you know, come on. And yeah, that got the monarchy overthrown. There's a war with the Etruscans, but the Romans win, obviously, in the end. And yeah, the name of monarchy is like the thing that it's like, just like in America, where the bad thing they threaten, they warn about their political is, oh, he's going to set himself up as a king. You watch, he's going to do it. And it's like, oh no, I'd never set myself up as a king, sir. You know, I'm committed to the Republic and all this sort of stuff. You know, so it's very much the same mindset.
Yeah, and so the Romans they took over all the area around like Latium. And the Latins and the Etruscans and the peoples further afield, the Samnites. And by the time of Pyrrhus, they've got down to southern Italy. Basically, they're sort of pushing on the Tarentines down right in the bottom of Italy. And so when Pyrrhus does go across that little stretch of water, he's nearly shipwrecked or half shipwrecked.
Yes.
And Plutarch says he actually has to throw himself overboard.
Yeah. How dramatic is that? But this is another just constant threat. The Mediterranean apparently has a lot of storms because these storms happen all the time. And like any military campaign you read about, at some point a storm will have like the Persians invading. They lose half their Phoenician fleet and storms and rocks around Salamis and stuff like this. You know, it's Salamis. You know, these storms are just something that constantly happens. And yeah, Pyrrhus gets shipwrecked, doesn't he, with only a few thousand horse. So who knows?
Bad.
Yeah.
And when he gets there, he's a military commander, isn't he? And when he gets there, he starts to try and organise a stiff defence. And apparently, the sort of lazy, feckless people don't sort of take very kindly to that. They weren't expecting that.
The whole thing is amazing, right? So the it's really great. The Tarentines are like, we are going to get kicked in by Rome because they're not. I mean, the cavalry is apparently good, but they're not, professional fighters or something. And they're worried that they're going to get kicked in by the Romans. They're like, well, why don't we just ask this King Pyrrhus? He's pretty handy with an army, apparently. Why don't we just bring him over and have them conquer him? And then he's fine. And so they think that he's just going to come over and do all the fighting for them. And so he arrives with not very many men really. They do end up. The rest of his army does end up getting there though, don't they?
Eventually, yeah.
But yeah, so he gets there within like a few thousand men and sort of takes possession of the city. And he goes in and they're basically all drinking and just enjoying themselves. And it's like, do you guys realize you're fighting a war? And Pyrrhus just goes up and he shuts up all of the taverns and pubs and whatnot. And they all start getting pissy at him. It's like, dude, you're not fighting the Romans, Like, you have something you should be doing at this point. But they expected that he would just go off and fight the war for them.
Yeah.
Those feckless, lazy bastards.
Yeah, it says exactly. I mean, Plutarch says, quote, being unaccustomed to be under command, they called that a slavery, which was not a life of pleasure, end quote.
Exactly.
Quite extreme way of looking at it.
Yeah, but it's, if I can't go drinking, then I'm basically a slave. It's like fighting for my freedom is slavery. It's like, okay, well, the Romans will take all of this away from you soon enough. If with an attitude like that, you aren't going to keep any of this.
Yeah, well, soon enough, they do come to blows, the Romans and Pyrrhus's army and the other, the allies of Italy, because the other people around Italy are willing, the Samnites and things, are willing to fight alongside Pyrrhus against the Romans.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not too long before they have their first sort of big battle.
I've just got the Wikipedia article up. So apparently Pyrrhus enters Italy with an army of 20,000 infantry, which would have been phalangites, giant Macedonian phalanxes, 3,000 cavalry, 2,000 archers, 500 slingers, and 20 war elephants that had been loaned to him by Ptolemy II, who had promised another 9,000 soldiers and 50 more elephants to defend Epirus while Pyrrhus and his army were away, which is nice.
Yeah, take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like we said, I think this is probably this is the first time the Romans have seen war elephant.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to defend against it, so they work really well. They're sort of they're overpowered for a couple of battles.
Yeah, there's a really do they have the diplomatic encounter with Pyrrhus before the first battle or after it? I honestly can't remember.
Before, I think. I'm just looking at it right now. It's before. Yeah.
Yeah, it's before, because there's a story that Pyrrhus leads the Roman envoys into his tent, but has an elephant positioned outside to trumpet at them. And it's supposed to scare them, but doesn't. And they're like, we're because he tries to bribe them first. And they're like, no, we're not going to be bribed by you. And then the consul or whoever it is says, look, neither your money yesterday nor your elephant today impresses me, sir. And it's like, oh yeah, you're so fucking great. It's like, this sounds like a bullshit story. Like an elephant behind a sheet. Like, really?
Yeah.
They smell, they're loud. They're not just going to stand there quietly and trumpet on cue. Just bullshit. I don't believe that story. That doesn't sound like Pyrrhus.
Yeah. No, that one does smack of just being made up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You
Roman
sort of get a feel
propaganda
for it after a while, don't you? Like, that's just the reality of that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it doesn't seem like the sort of thing Pyrrhus would do either. I'd be far more inclined to believe he did, challenge them to personal combat or something.
Yeah, the Romans are just sort of they do their classic thing. They're pretty hard line. Like if ever you want to try and make a treaty with them or negotiate with them, their line is more or less the same. It's like, no, you're going to do what we want. Yeah. Or we'll fight to the death about it. So
yeah, that is literally what they say. And the Romans, every treaty they sign is to the detriment of whoever they're signing it with. Like they're absolute cancer. Like to the rest of the world, the Romans must have just looked like an absolute cancer. I mean, they did take everything over, so I'm not surprised that, but like it's belligerent. Rome is a belligerent state.